5 years. That's how long Lena Hart believed she was safe. 5 years of hiding, of reinventing herself, of pretending the past was buried deep enough to stay dead. But the past doesn't forget, and neither does Victor Romano. One Saturday morning at a farmer's market, one black SUV, one familiar face stepping into the sunlight, and everything she built comes crashing down. Because the man she loved and feared in equal measure is standing 10 feet away, and her 4-year-old son, his son, is holding her hand. Some secrets were never meant to survive. If you're hooked, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started like any other Saturday. Ordinary, predictable, safe. Lena Hart moved through the farmer's market with practiced efficiency, her canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder, her son's small hand tucked firmly in hers. The air smelled of fresh bread and crushed herbs, and the early autumn sun filtered through the canvas awnings in golden stripes. Around them, the weekend crowd ebbed and flowed. Young families, retired couples, college students hunting for organic coffee beans. Normal people living normal lives. Lena had worked hard to become one of them. "Mama, can we get strawberries?" Her son's voice was bright with hope. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, turned up toward her with that expression that melted her resolve every single time. "We'll see, sweetheart," Lena murmured, squeezing his hand gently. At 4 years old, Ethan was all boundless energy and endless questions, a whirlwind of curiosity wrapped in a pint-sized frame. He had her sandy blonde hair, carefully dyed to match hers, but those eyes were pure Romano. She saw them every time she looked at him, a constant reminder of what she'd left behind, of who she'd left behind. Lena shook the thought away as they approached a produce stand overflowing with late-season tomatoes and bundles of kale. She didn't think about Victor anymore. She couldn't afford to. 5 years of running, 5 years of building a new identity, 5 years of making sure her son would never know the violence and darkness that had once consumed her entire world. All of it would collapse if she let herself remember. "These heirlooms are beautiful," the vendor said, an older woman with kind eyes and dirt under her fingernails. "Picked them fresh this morning." Lena smiled, the expression automatic and warm, honed by years of blending in. "I'll take 3, please." As the vendor bagged her purchase, Lena let her gaze wander across the market. It was busier than usual, the late September weather drawing out everyone who wanted to savor the last breath of summer before the cold set in. She cataloged faces without thinking, a habit from another life, when awareness meant survival. A teenager in a band t-shirt, an elderly man with a cane, a mother wrestling a stroller through the crowd. All harmless, all ordinary. And then she saw it. The black SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the market, sleek and expensive and utterly out of place among the Subarus and minivans that typically crowded the parking area. Lena's heart stuttered. Her hand tightened reflexively around Ethan's, hard enough that he made a small sound of protest. "Mama, you're squishing me." "Sorry, baby." She loosened her grip but didn't let go. Her eyes stayed locked on the vehicle, her entire body going rigid with a fear so visceral it tasted like copper on her tongue. "It's nothing, just a car. Lots of people drive black SUVs." But even as she tried to rationalize it, her instinct screamed otherwise. She knew that particular shade of black, that specific make and model. She knew what it meant. The driver's door opened first. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than Lena made in 3 months. He scanned the market with the focused attention of someone trained to assess threats, and Lena's stomach dropped. She recognized that posture, that watchfulness. Security. Professional security. The rear passenger door opened. Time slowed to a crawl as Victor Romano emerged from the vehicle. 5 years had done nothing to diminish him. If anything, he looked more commanding than she remembered. His dark hair still worn short, his jaw still sharp enough to cut glass, his presence still radiating the kind of power that made people instinctively step back. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, the jacket unbuttoned, his movements fluid and controlled as he straightened to his full height. Lena couldn't breathe. 5 years. 5 years of running, of hiding, of praying this moment would never come. And here he was, stepping into her carefully constructed sanctuary like a wolf into a henhouse. "Mama?" Ethan tugged at her hand, confused by her sudden stillness. What's wrong? Everything. Everything was wrong. Victor turned, his gaze sweeping across the market with casual authority. He was looking for something, or someone. His security detail fanned out slightly, maintaining a perimeter that was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Lena knew. She'd lived in that world long enough to recognize the choreography of protection and control. Her mind raced through options with desperate speed. Run, hide, grab Ethan and disappear into the crowd before Victor saw them. They could make it to the car, could drive away, could disappear again. But even as the thoughts formed, she knew they were fantasy. Victor Romano didn't leave things to chance. If he was here, it wasn't coincidence. If he was here, someone had talked, someone had found her. And if he saw Ethan... The thought catapulted Lena into motion. She dropped the bag of tomatoes, ignoring the vendor's startled exclamation, and swept Ethan up into her arms in one smooth movement. "Mama!" Ethan laughed, delighted by the sudden attention. "What are you—" "Ish, baby. We're playing a game." Lena's voice came out steadier than she felt. She turned away from Victor's position, angling her body to shield Ethan from view. "We're going to be very quiet and very still, okay? Like hide and seek." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Are we hiding?" "Yes." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "We're hiding." She moved deeper into the crowd, keeping her movements casual despite the panic clawing at her chest. A group of college students provided temporary cover. She ducked behind a stall selling handmade soaps, then another offering fresh-cut flowers. Her mind cataloged escape routes with the precision of someone who'd spent years planning for exactly this scenario. The parking lot was too exposed. If she tried for her car now, Victor would see them, but there was a small park adjacent to the market, a patch of green space with walking paths that connected to a residential neighborhood. If she could reach it, if she could get far enough away before Victor realized, "Well, hello there!" Lena nearly jumped out of her skin as Mrs. Chen appeared beside her, the elderly woman's face creasing into a warm smile. Mrs. Chen ran the organic vegetable stand and had become something of a fixture in Lena's Saturday routine. Friendly, chatty, completely harmless under normal circumstances. Under these circumstances, she was a disaster. "Mrs. Chen," Lena forced a smile, still holding Ethan close. "How are you?" "Oh, wonderful, wonderful, and look at this handsome boy." Mrs. Chen reached out to pat Ethan's cheek. "Getting so big. How old are you now, sweetheart?" "4," Ethan announced proudly, momentarily forgetting their games. "4 years old, my goodness," Mrs. Chen beamed. "You know, Lena, he looks more like his father every time I see him. Those eyes, so dark and serious. Your husband must be—" "I really need to go." Lena cut her off, the words coming out sharper than intended. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. We're running late." The older woman blinked, taken aback by Lena's abruptness, but she recovered quickly. Of course, you go on. See you next week." Lena was already moving, weaving between stalls with Ethan balanced on her hip. Her son was getting heavy, 4 years old and growing like a weed, but adrenaline made him feel weightless. She kept her head down, her hair falling forward to partially obscure her face. "Just a little further. Just make it to the park and then—" "Mama, that man is looking at us." Lena's blood turned to ice. "What man, baby?" She kept her voice light, playful, even as dread coiled in her stomach. Ethan pointed over her shoulder, back toward the center of the market. "The tall man by the flower stand. He keeps looking." Lena didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel Victor's gaze like a physical weight, that same focused attention that had once made her feel protected and desired and terrified all at once. He'd seen them. The realization hit her like a freight train. After 5 years of running, 5 years of hiding, 5 years of building a life where Victor Romano was nothing but a memory, he'd found her. And worse, so much worse, he'd seen Ethan. "We need to go faster, sweetheart." Lena adjusted her grip on her son and broke into a quick walk that was just shy of running. People turned to look as she passed, their expressions curious or concerned, but she didn't care. Let them stare, let them wonder. All that mattered was getting Ethan away before— "Lena!" The voice stopped her dead in her tracks. Deep, controlled, unmistakable. It carried across the market crowd with quiet authority, and Lena felt it resonate in her bones like a tuning fork struck against stone. She stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to ignore him, to keep moving. But she knew Victor, knew what happened when people ran from him. Slowly she turned. Victor stood 15 feet away, his security maintaining a discreet distance. In the chaos of the farmer's market, the vendors calling out prices, the children laughing, the general weekend buzz, he was a point of absolute stillness. His dark eyes were locked on her with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade to background noise. 5 years. 5 years since she'd seen that face, since she'd felt the gravity of his presence. Time had changed nothing about the way he affected her. The fear, the anger, the traitorous flutter of something that might have been longing if she let herself acknowledge it. "Hello, Victor." Her voice came out steady, a small victory. His gaze flicked to Ethan, still balanced on her hip, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not quite. Something deeper, more complex. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We need to talk." "No." Lena's arms tightened protectively around her son. "We really don't." "Lena." Victor took a step forward, and his security moved with him like shadows. "Don't make this difficult." "Difficult?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "You showing up here, in my life, after 5 years, that's what's difficult." A muscle twitched in Victor's jaw. His eyes hadn't left Ethan, and Lena could see the calculations happening behind them. He was too smart, too observant. He'd already done the math. "How old is he?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with everything unsaid. Lena felt Ethan shift against her, picking up on the tension even if he didn't understand it. "That's none of your business." "Like hell it isn't." Victor's voice dropped to something dangerous, that quiet tone that had once preceded violence in his world. "How old?" "Mama?" Ethan's small voice broke the standoff. "Who is that man?" Lena's heart shattered. She looked down at her son, her beautiful, innocent son, who knew nothing of his father, nothing of the world Lena had fled from, and felt the weight of every lie she'd ever told him pressed down on her shoulders. "Just someone Mama used to know, baby." She forced a smile. "It's okay." When she looked back at Victor, his expression had changed. The dangerous edge was still there, but underneath it was something rawer. Hurt, betrayal, and a dawning realization that was reshaping his entire reality. "4," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question this time. "He's 4 years old." Lena said nothing. What could she say? The truth was written all over Ethan's face, in the dark eyes that mirrored Victor's exactly, in the stubborn set of his jaw, in the way he watched the world with that same intense focus. Victor took another step forward, and Lena instinctively stepped back. The movement wasn't lost on him. His expression hardened. "You've been running for 5 years with my son." "I've been protecting my son for 5 years," Lena shot back, her voice low but fierce. "From your world, from the violence, from everything you represent." "From me?" The words were flat, emotionless, but Lena heard the accusation beneath them. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "From you." For a moment, Victor looked like he'd been struck. Then his expression shuddered, and the man who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and control reasserted himself. He gestured subtly to his security, and they moved closer, forming a loose perimeter that suddenly made the crowded farmer's market feel very small. "We're not doing this here," Victor said, "not with half the city watching." "We're not doing this anywhere." Lena shifted Ethan higher on her hip, preparing to bolt if necessary. "You need to leave, now." "That's not going to happen." "Victor, 4 years, Lena." His voice was quiet but absolute. 4 years of my son's life that you stole from me. Did you really think I'd walk away once I found you? You shouldn't have found us at all." Fear made her reckless. "How did you even—" "Does it matter?" Victor cut her off. "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving without answers." Lena's mind raced. They were attracting attention now. People were starting to notice the well-dressed man in his security detail, the young woman holding a child, the tension crackling between them like static electricity before a storm. In another few minutes, someone might call the police. In another few minutes, this entire situation could spiral completely out of control. "Mama," I'm scared. Ethan buried his face against her shoulder, his small body trembling. The words broke something in Lena. All the fear, all the anger, all the desperate need to protect her child. It coalesced into a clarity that was almost painful in its intensity. One conversation, she said finally, her voice tight. One conversation, and then you leave us alone. Victor's expression didn't change, but she saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Victory, maybe. Or relief. My car, he said, gesturing toward the black SUV. We'll have privacy. Absolutely not. Lena's laugh was bitter. I'm not getting in a vehicle with you and your security. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. Public, neutral territory. 30 minutes. That's all you get. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Lena could see him weighing his options. He could force the issue. She knew he had the power and the resources. But making a scene in a crowded farmer's market, potentially traumatizing a child who was clearly already frightened, that wasn't Victor's style. For all his darkness, he'd always had lines he wouldn't cross. At least, he used to. Fine, he said finally. The coffee shop. 30 minutes. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Ethan. Something in his expression softened, just for a heartbeat, and Lena saw a glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Before the violence, before the fear, before everything fell apart. What's his name? Victor asked quietly. Lena hesitated. Telling him felt like surrendering something precious, like opening a door she'd spent 5 years keeping locked and bolted. But Ethan was watching them both now, his dark eyes moving between his mother and this stranger with a child's uncanny perception. Ethan, she said finally. His name is Ethan. Victor's throat worked as he swallowed. He nodded once, then walked away, his security falling in around him like a well-rehearsed formation. Lena watched him go, her heart still hammering, Ethan's weight solid and real against her. Mama, who was that? Ethan asked again, his voice small. Lena pressed a kiss to his temple, breathing in the familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo and little boy sweat. Someone from a long time ago, she murmured. Someone I hoped we'd never see again. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. Victor Romano didn't let go of things that belonged to him. And from the moment he'd seen Ethan, from the moment he'd recognized his own features in his son's face, Lena's carefully constructed life had become a house of cards in a hurricane. The only question now was how much would be left standing when the storm passed. The coffee shop was called The Daily Grind, a deliberately quirky establishment that catered to the neighborhood's demographic of young professionals and artistic types. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, local art for sale on consignment. Lena had chosen it specifically because it was the opposite of any place Victor would normally frequent. Too casual, too bohemian, too ordinary for a man who lived in a world of exclusive clubs and private rooms. She sat in a corner booth with Ethan beside her, a coloring book and crayons spread across the table to keep him occupied. Her coffee sat untouched, growing cold while she watched the door with the kind of hypervigilance that had once been second nature. Victor arrived exactly 30 minutes after their confrontation at the market. Of course he did. Victor Romano was never late, never early, always precisely on time, a man who controlled even the minutes of his day with iron discipline. He entered alone, his security remaining outside in a posture that was clearly protective but trying to appear casual. The barista behind the counter did a double take, her eyes widening as she took in the expensive suit, the commanding presence. Victor ordered something, Lena couldn't hear what, and moved toward her table with a grace that made him look like he owned the place. Maybe he did. She wouldn't be surprised. Lena. He stood beside the booth, waiting. Sit. She gestured to the opposite bench, her voice clipped. Victor slid into the seat, his movements controlled and precise. His eyes immediately went to Ethan, who looked up from his coloring book with open curiosity. Hi, Ethan said brightly, because her son had inherited none of her fear and all of Victor's boldness. I'm Ethan. Hello, Ethan. Victor's voice was softer than Lena had ever heard it, gentler. That's a very nice dinosaur you're drawing. Ethan beamed. It's a T-Rex. They're my favorite. Do you like dinosaurs? I do now, Victor said quietly, and the words hit Lena like a punch to the chest. Ethan, sweetheart, can you go pick out a cookie from the display case? Lena pulled a $5 bill from her wallet. Take your time choosing, okay? Okay, Mama. Ethan scrambled out of the booth with the bill clutched in his hand and headed toward the pastry counter, immediately absorbed in the important task of cookie selection. The moment he was out of earshot, Victor's expression changed. The softness vanished, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Tell me everything, he said. And don't you dare lie to me, Lena. Not about this. Lena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking warmth that wouldn't come. What do you want to know? Everything. Victor leaned forward, his intensity focused on her like a laser. Start with why you ran. Why you disappeared without a word. Why you've been hiding my son from me for 4 years. Your son? Lena's laugh was sharp and humorless. He's been my son for 4 years, Victor. Mine. I carried him, I birthed him, I raised him. You don't get to claim him just because you shared DNA. I would have been there, Victor said, his voice dropping to something lethal. If you'd told me you were pregnant, if you'd given me even the slightest chance, I would have been there for all of it. Would you? Lena challenged. Really? Or would you have done exactly what you always did, made decisions about my life, controlled every aspect, turned pregnancy into another thing you could manage and manipulate? Victor's jaw clenched. That's not fair. Fair? The word came out louder than intended, and Lena forced herself to lower her voice. You want to talk about fair? You who built an empire on violence and intimidation? Who made enemies faster than friends? Who lived every single day with a target on your back? She shook her head, feeling tears prick at her eyes and hating herself for the weakness. I found out I was pregnant 2 days after Antonio Marchetti tried to kill you. 2 days after I watched you come home covered in blood. His blood. Your blood. I didn't even know. I stood in our bathroom with a positive pregnancy test in my hands and realized I was bringing a child into a world where his father might die on any given Tuesday. The memory crashed over her with visceral intensity. She'd been 24 years old, in love with a man who terrified her as much as he enthralled her, staring at 2 pink lines that represented both a miracle and a catastrophe. So you ran, Victor said flatly. So I protected my baby, Lena corrected. I made a choice, Victor. Maybe it was the wrong choice in your eyes, but it was mine to make. No. Victor's hand slammed down on the table hard enough to rattle her coffee cup. Several nearby patrons looked over, startled, but he ignored them. You don't get to make that choice alone. He's my son too. You had no right. I had every right. Lena's voice rose to match his. Every right to choose safety over danger. Every right to choose a normal life over whatever nightmare you would have turned us into. You think you would have let us go to the park? Let him go to preschool? Let him have play dates and birthday parties and all the normal things children deserve? You would have locked us in a fortress and called it protection. You don't know that. Don't I? Lena leaned forward, her eyes blazing. I lived with you for 2 years, Victor. 2 years of armed guards and bulletproof cars and never, ever being alone. 2 years of watching you make decisions about my safety, my schedule, my entire existence without ever asking what I wanted. You loved me, I know you did, but you controlled me too. And I couldn't let you do that to my child. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor stared at her, his expression a war between fury and something that might have been pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough to be dangerous. So you stole him from me. You let me believe you were dead. I never... You disappeared without a trace, Lena. What the hell was I supposed to think? His control was fracturing now, real emotion bleeding through the cracks. I tore apart 3 states looking for you. I questioned everyone you'd ever known. I followed every lead, every rumor, every possible trail, and you were just gone, like you'd never existed. Lena felt something twist in her chest. She'd known he would look for her, had counted on it, in fact, had built her entire escape plan around anticipating his moves. But hearing the pain in his voice, seeing the evidence of it in his eyes, made her question everything she'd been so certain about 5 years ago. I'm sorry, she said finally, and meant it. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, but I'm not sorry for keeping Ethan safe. Safe from me, Victor said bitterly, his own father. Safe from your world, Lena clarified. There's a difference. Is there? Victor gestured vaguely at the coffee shop, at the normal Saturday afternoon unfolding around them. Because from where I'm sitting, you've built him a fantasy. You're living in this bubble pretending the world is all farmers markets and coloring books, and the second reality intrudes the second I found you. It all came crashing down. How is that safer? The words hit harder than Lena wanted to admit. Because he was right, wasn't he? For all her careful planning, all her years of running, Victor had found them anyway. And now Ethan was caught in the middle of a conflict he didn't understand, between parents who existed in completely different worlds. I did the best I could, she said quietly. With the information I had, with the choices available to me. You had other choices, Victor countered. You could have trusted me. Could I? Lena met his gaze steadily. The man I knew didn't compromise, didn't negotiate. He took what he wanted and dealt with the consequences later. He would have locked me in that penthouse apartment and kept me there for my own protection for the entire pregnancy. He would have made every decision about our child's life without asking my opinion. And when I objected, when I fought back, he would have told me he was doing it because he loved me, because he knew better, because keeping me safe was worth any price, including my freedom. Victor flinched. It was barely visible, just a tiny tightening around his eyes. But Lena caught it. She'd scored a direct hit, and they both knew it. People change, he said finally. Do they? Lena wanted to believe it. Some small, foolish part of her that had never stopped loving him wanted desperately to believe it. Or do they just get better at justifying who they've always been? Before Victor could respond, Ethan returned from the pastry counter with a chocolate chip cookie the size of his head and a triumphant smile. Look what I got, Mama. The lady said it was the biggest one. That's wonderful, baby. Lena helped him back into the booth, grateful for the interruption. What do you say? Thank you, Mama. Ethan took a huge bite of cookie, getting crumbs everywhere, then looked at Victor with those dark eyes that were so heartbreakingly familiar. Do you want some? It's really good. Victor's expression did something complicated. For a moment, the hardened crime boss disappeared, and Lena saw just a man looking at his son for the first time, realizing everything he'd missed. That's very generous, Victor said, his voice rough. But you enjoy it. Ethan nodded happily and returned his attention to the cookie. Lena watched Victor watch their son and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This wasn't how she'd imagined this conversation going. She'd expected threats, demands, maybe even violence. What she hadn't expected was this raw, unguarded emotion playing across Victor's face as he studied every detail of the child he'd never known he had. He looks like you, Lena said quietly, because the silence was becoming unbearable. He looks like both of us. Victor's eyes traced Ethan's features with an intensity that made Lena's chest ache. He has your smile, your kindness, but my eyes, He stopped, shook his head. 4 years. 4 years of first words and first steps and everything. You took that from me, Lena. You took all of it. I know. The admission felt like swallowing glass. And I wish I could say I'd make a different choice if I could do it over. But I can't. Because look at him, Victor. Really look at him. He's happy. He's healthy. He's safe. He doesn't wake up screaming from nightmares about gunfire. He doesn't know what it means to have armed guards follow him everywhere. He gets to be a child. Can you honestly tell me he would have had that in your world? Victor was quiet for a long moment, watching Ethan demolish his cookie with the single-minded focus of a 4-year-old on a mission. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. What's his full name? Lena hesitated. Ethan James Hart. Hart, your maiden name? Yes. No record of a father? No. Victor's jaw tightened. So in the eyes of the law, he doesn't exist as my son. You've made absolutely certain of that. I've made sure he's protected, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Protected from what exactly? Victor leaned back, his posture deceptively relaxed. From child support? From inheritance? From knowing his father? From being leverage, Lena said bluntly. You know as well as I do that in your world, family is a weapon. How many times did you tell me about enemies who went after wives, children, anyone who could be used as pressure? I wasn't going to let Ethan become a pawn in whatever war you were fighting. I would never You wouldn't have to. Lena's voice rose again, and she forced herself to calm down. Ethan was watching now, his cookie forgotten, picking up on the tension even if he couldn't understand the words. That's what you don't understand, Victor. It's not about what you would or wouldn't do. It's about what other people would do to get to you, and I couldn't— Her voice cracked. I couldn't risk my baby becoming collateral damage in someone else's war. The truth of it hung between them, ugly and undeniable. Because Victor knew she was right. They both knew it. His world was violence and strategy and constant calculation of threats. Children in that world weren't children. They were vulnerabilities, targets, tools for manipulation. But that didn't make her choices hurt any less. And it didn't change the fact that he was looking at his son for the first time at 4 years old, that he'd missed every milestone, every moment, every piece of Ethan's existence up until now. I have a son, Victor said quietly, and the wonder in his voice was almost painful to hear. I have a son, and I don't know his favorite color. I don't know if he's allergic to anything. I don't know— He stopped, composed himself. I don't know anything about him. Blue? Lena said softly. His favorite color is blue. He's not allergic to anything. He loves dinosaurs and trucks, and sometimes he sleeps with a stuffed elephant named Mr. Peanuts. He's stubborn and sweet, and sometimes he laughs so hard he gives himself hiccups. She swallowed hard. He's the best thing I've ever done. The only thing I've done that actually matters. Victor looked at her then, really looked at her, and Lena saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. For just a moment, they weren't enemies or exes or two people on opposite sides of an impossible situation. They were just two parents looking at the same child, wanting the same thing even if they disagreed violently on how to achieve it. I want to know him, Victor said. I want to be part of his life. Victor. I'm not asking, Lena. The hardness was back, the crime boss reasserting control. I'm telling you, that's my son, mine, and I will not walk away and pretend I never found you. I can't. And I can't let you drag us back into your world, Lena countered. I won't. Then we have a problem. Victor's voice was soft but absolute. Because I'm not leaving, and you're not running again. So we need to figure out how this works, or things are going to get very complicated very quickly. Lena felt panic claw at her chest. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading for 5 years. Victor had found them, and he wasn't going to let them go, and all her careful planning, all her precautions, all her desperate attempts to build a safe life for her son, none of it mattered. Are you threatening me? She asked quietly. I'm stating facts. Victor's expression was unreadable. You have something that belongs to me. I have resources you can't begin to imagine. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. Your choice. There is no easy way, Lena said bitterly. There's only your way or the highway, right? Just like always. Mama? Ethan's small voice cut through the tension. Are you and the man fighting? Both of them looked at him, the small, beautiful child who had no idea his entire world was about to change. Lena felt tears burn behind her eyes and forced them back through sheer willpower. No, baby, she lied. We're just talking. Adult stuff. Very boring. Ethan didn't look convinced, but he was 4, which meant his attention span had limits. He returned to his cookie, though he kept glancing between them with worried eyes. Victor stood abruptly. I need to go, but this conversation isn't over, Lena. Not even close. Victor, please. I'll be in touch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. When you're ready to have a real conversation, one where you're not fighting me every step of the way, call me. He looked at Ethan one more time, and something in his expression made Lena's heart clench. Then he turned and walked out of the coffee shop, his security materializing from wherever they'd been waiting and falling into formation around him. Lena sat frozen, staring at the business card on the table. Simple, elegant, embossed with Victor Romano's name and a single phone number. No company, no address, just the name and the number. As if that was all the information anyone would ever need. Mama, are you okay? Ethan climbed into her lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck in a hug that threatened to break her completely. I'm okay, baby, Lena whispered, holding him close and breathing in his familiar scent. Everything's going to be okay. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Nothing was going to be okay. Victor had found them, and he wanted his son, and Lena had no idea how to protect Ethan from a man who had built an empire on getting exactly what he wanted, no matter the cost. The past had finally caught up to them, and the reckoning, she knew, had only just begun. The afternoon sun was setting by the time Lena and Ethan made it home to their small apartment on the third floor of a converted Victorian house. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, windows that rattled when the wind blew. But it was theirs. Safe. Anonymous. Or at least it had been until this morning. Lena unlocked the door with hands that still trembled slightly, ushering Ethan inside with a practiced sweep that checked the apartment's interior even as she moved. Old habits, buried but never truly dead. The living room was exactly as they'd left it, toys scattered across the worn rug, her laptop open on the coffee table, the breakfast dishes still in the sink. Normal. Ordinary. A life that now felt as fragile as spun glass. "Can I watch cartoons, Mama?" Ethan was already reaching for the remote, the drama of the afternoon forgotten in the resilient way of small children. "Sure, baby, just for a little while." Lena needed him occupied, needed space to think, to process, to figure out what the hell she was going to do now that her worst nightmare had materialized in the middle of a farmer's market. She moved to the kitchen on autopilot, filling a glass with water she didn't drink, staring out the window at the street below. Looking for black SUVs. Looking for men in expensive suits. Looking for any sign that Victor had decided 30 minutes wasn't enough, that he was done waiting for her to call, that he was going to take what he wanted the way he'd always taken everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Lena nearly dropped the glass. Unknown number. Her heart hammered as she stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. It could be Victor. It could be his people. It could be... The phone stopped ringing. A moment later, a text message appeared. "It's me. We need to talk. Tonight, I'll send a car at 8. No signature, no name. It didn't need one." Lena's hand shook as she typed a response. "No, I need time." The reply came immediately. "You've had 5 years. I've had 5 hours. We talk tonight, or I come to you. Your choice." She wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to scream, to rage, to do something other than stand in her tiny kitchen feeling the walls close in around her. But Ethan was in the next room, and falling apart wasn't an option, so she did what she'd been doing for 5 years. She breathed through the fear and found her center. "Fine, but not at my apartment. Tell me where." A pause. Then, "The Peninsula Hotel. Presidential Suite. 8 p.m. Come alone." Lena barked out a laugh that had no humor in it. Come alone to Victor Romano's hotel suite. Right, because that wasn't every red flag in the universe waving frantically. But what choice did she have? He knew where she lived now, knew about Ethan. If she didn't show up, he'd make good on his threat. "I need to arrange childcare." 8:30. Fine. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Lena staring at her phone and wondering how her life had spiraled so completely out of control in less than 12 hours. "Mama?" Ethan appeared in the doorway, his stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. "Can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" Lena looked at her son, her beautiful, innocent son, who had no idea that his entire world was shifting beneath his feet, and forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face in half. "Of course, baby. Mac and cheese it is." 3 hours later, Lena stood outside the presidential suite of the Peninsula Hotel, wearing the only dress in her closet that didn't scream struggling single mother, a simple black sheath she'd bought for a job interview 2 years ago and worn exactly once. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup minimal but careful. Armor, she thought. Professional armor to face a man who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and still haunted her dreams. She'd left Ethan with Mrs. Chen, the kind elderly woman from the farmer's market who'd been delighted to babysit on such short notice. The irony of trusting her son to the same woman who'd inadvertently helped Victor spot them wasn't lost on Lena, but her options were limited. Her neighbor Sarah was out of town, and everyone else she knew was too new, too casual, not someone you left your child with when you were walking into the lion's den. Lena raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles made contact. One of Victor's security team stood there, tall, built like a tank, expressionless. "Ms. Hart, he's expecting you." Of course he was. Victor probably had cameras in the hallway, had known she was coming before she'd even stepped off the elevator. Some things never changed. The suite was exactly what she'd expected. Obscenely luxurious, all marble and mahogany, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victor stood by those windows now, his back to the door, silhouetted against the glittering skyline. He'd changed from his earlier suit into something more casual, dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was jarring seeing him like this, almost domestic, almost. "You came," he said without turning around. "Did I have a choice?" Lena stayed near the door, maintaining distance. The security guard had disappeared, leaving them alone, and she wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. "There's always a choice." Victor turned, and the look on his face stopped whatever sharp retort Lena had been preparing. He looked exhausted. Not physically, Victor never showed physical weakness, but emotionally, like someone had taken everything he thought he knew and turned it inside out. "Thank you for coming." The politeness threw her. This wasn't the Victor she remembered, the one who demanded and commanded and never, ever said thank you for things he considered his due. "You didn't give me much option," Lena said carefully. "The threat was pretty clear." It wasn't a threat. Victor moved away from the window toward the suite's bar. "It was a statement of fact. I need to understand what happened. Why you ran. Why you kept my son from me for 4 years. And I need to figure out what happens next." He poured 2 glasses of scotch, neat, then seemed to remember himself. "Do you still drink scotch?" "No." The lie came automatically. She did still drink scotch, occasionally, when the nightmares got bad enough. But accepting a drink from Victor felt like accepting something more, and she wasn't ready for that. "I'll take water." He nodded and poured water from a crystal decanter instead, bringing both glasses to the seating area, a collection of cream-colored sofas arranged around a glass coffee table. He gestured for her to sit. Lena remained standing. "I can't stay long. My sitter has to leave by 10. "Mrs. Chen, right?" Victor settled into one of the sofas, perfectly relaxed, and Lena felt her stomach drop. "Nice woman. Runs the organic vegetable stand at the farmer's market. Widowed 5 years ago, lives alone, volunteers at the community center on Tuesdays and Thursdays." The casual recitation of facts made Lena's skin crawl. "You had her investigated. In the last 8 hours, you had my babysitter investigated. I had everyone in your life investigated." Victor's voice was matter-of-fact. "Your neighbor, Sarah Whitman, graphic designer, recently divorced, has a dog named Biscuit. Your employer at the diner, Tom Kowalski, former Marine, 2 kids in college, votes Republican. Your landlord, Margaret—" "Stop!" Lena's voice came out sharper than intended. "Just stop. You've made your point. You have resources. You did your homework. You know everything about my pathetic little life. Congratulations." "That's not what this is about," Victor said quietly. "I need to know my son is safe, that the people around him are trustworthy. That's not intimidation, Lena. That's being a father." "You don't get to be his father!" The words exploded out of her, 5 years of guilt and fear and anger finally finding a target. "You don't get to show up after 4 years and start making decisions about his safety, his life, his anything. I've been doing this alone. Me. I've been the one getting up at 3 a.m. when he's sick, taking him to the doctor, teaching him to tie his shoes, reading him bedtime stories, protecting him from everything. You don't just get to walk in and claim the title." "Why not?" Victor's calm was infuriating. "He's my son, my blood. You can deny it all you want, but biology doesn't lie, Lena. One look at him and anyone can see he's mine." "Biology doesn't make you a parent," Lena shot back. "Being there makes you a parent, and you weren't there." "Because you didn't give me the chance." Victor's composure cracked, just slightly. "You made a unilateral decision to cut me out of my child's life, and you want to stand there and lecture me about being a father? You want to make me the villain when you're the one who ran?" "I ran because staying meant watching my son grow up surrounded by violence." Lena was shaking now, all the fear from earlier transmuting into rage. "Do you have any idea what it was like? Loving you and being terrified of you at the same time? Never knowing if this would be the day someone finally succeeded in killing you? Living in a gilded cage and being told it was for my own good?" "I never caged you." "Didn't you?" Lena laughed bitterly. "You controlled every aspect of my life, Victor. Where I went, who I saw, What I did. You had people following me everywhere. You vetted my friends, monitored my phone calls, decided what was safe for me. You called it protection, but it was control. And I was so in love with you that I convinced myself it was romantic. Victor stood abruptly, his scotch forgotten. I was keeping you alive. Do you have any idea how many people wanted to hurt me through you? How many threats I dealt with that you never knew about? Exactly, Lena threw her hands up. I never knew. You made decisions for me, about me, without ever asking what I wanted. And when I found out I was pregnant, when I realized you'd do the same thing to our child, her voice broke. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let my baby grow up in a world where danger was normal, where armed guards were necessary, where every decision was about managing threats instead of living life. So you took him and ran, Victor said flatly. You disappeared in the middle of the night with my child and never looked back. I looked back every single day, Lena whispered. I looked back and wondered if I'd made the right choice. If you were looking for us. If you were hurting. If... She stopped, swallowed hard. If you missed me. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. Victor stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Missed you? His voice was rough. Lena, I nearly destroyed myself looking for you. I called in every favor, leveraged every connection, spent millions trying to find any trace of where you'd gone. For the first 6 months, I barely slept. I kept thinking you'd been taken, that someone had gotten to you, that you were out there somewhere needing me and I couldn't find you. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare show of agitation. And then I started finding the breadcrumbs, the closed bank account, the surrendered apartment lease, the carefully erased digital footprint, and I realized you hadn't been taken. You'd left. Voluntarily. You'd chosen to disappear. Lena's throat tightened. She'd known he would look, had planned for it, but hearing the pain in his voice made something crack inside her chest. I didn't have a choice, she said quietly. You had a choice, Victor countered. You chose not to trust me. You chose to believe I was incapable of change, of compromise, of being anything other than what I'd always been. You chose to see me as a threat instead of a partner. You gave me good reason, Lena said, but the words lacked heat. Victor moved closer, and Lena forced herself not to step back. He stopped just outside her personal space, near enough that she could see the weariness in his eyes, the fine lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. I found you 3 months after you left, he said quietly. Lena's world tilted. What? Philadelphia. You were working at a diner, living in a studio apartment in South Philly. You'd dyed your hair darker, were going by the name Sarah Hart. Victor's expression was unreadable. I had photos, surveillance footage. I knew exactly where you were. That's impossible. Lena's mind raced. I was careful. I changed everything. You were careful, Victor agreed, but I'm better. I'm always better, Lena. You knew that when you ran from me. The casual arrogance should have angered her, but all Lena felt was a growing sense of dread. If you found me, why didn't you? Because you weren't pregnant anymore, Victor said simply. The surveillance showed you working 12-hour shifts, drinking occasionally, living alone. No baby, no sign of a child. And I thought... He stopped, his jaw tightening. I thought maybe you'd lost the baby. Or maybe there had never been a baby at all, and I'd constructed some elaborate fantasy to explain why you'd run. He turned away, moving back toward the windows. So I let you go. I had my people pull the surveillance, erase the trail. I gave you the freedom you'd so desperately wanted. Lena's legs felt weak. She sank onto the sofa uninvited, trying to process what he was telling her. I was pregnant in Philadelphia. I wore baggy clothes. Hid it as long as I could, and then when I couldn't hide it anymore, I moved again, to Chicago. I know that now, Victor said. I've spent the last 8 hours reconstructing your entire timeline. Philadelphia, Chicago, Denver, Seattle, and finally here. You moved every time the baby got too obvious. Every time you were afraid someone might notice, might ask questions. You've been running for 5 years, constantly looking over your shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He looked at her, and there was something almost like admiration in his gaze. It was smart, paranoid, but smart. It kept us safe, Lena said defensively. Did it? Victor challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, you've been living in fear for 5 years, never relaxed, never truly settled, jumping at shadows and teaching our son to do the same. Is that really the life you wanted for him? Is that better than what I could have provided? Yes, Lena said immediately. Because he's happy, Victor. He doesn't know to be afraid. He thinks the world is good and safe and— Until today, Victor interrupted. Until a stranger approached his mother at a farmer's market and suddenly that safe world started crumbling. You can't protect him from reality forever, Lena. Eventually, he's going to have questions. Who his father is. Why he doesn't have one. Why you flinch every time you see a black SUV. The accuracy of the observation stung. I'm doing the best I can. I know. Victor's voice softened slightly. But the best you can isn't enough anymore. Not when I'm in the picture. Not when— He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. Sit down, please. We need to have a real conversation, and you standing there ready to bolt isn't conducive to that. Lena was already sitting, but she understood what he meant. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, her body language screaming fight or flight. Slowly she forced herself to settle back, to uncross her arms, to at least pretend at relaxation. Victor returned to his own seat. His scotch picked up and swirled but not drunk. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid, everything that had accumulated over 5 years of absence and hurt. Tell me about him, Victor said finally. Tell me about Ethan. Everything. Lena looked at him, searching for the trap, the angle, the manipulation. But all she saw was a man who genuinely wanted to know about his son, and something in her chest loosened slightly. He was born on March 15th, she began quietly. 3:20 in the morning, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. He came 2 weeks early, and I was terrified because I was alone in a Chicago hospital with fake ID and no one to call if something went wrong. The memory still made her throat tight. But he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and when he opened his eyes for the first time, I saw you looking back at me. Victor's hand tightened around his glass. What was it like, the birth? Painful, Lena said with a small, tired smile. Long, scary. But the moment they put him in my arms, none of that mattered anymore. He was mine, and I was going to protect him no matter what it cost me. Even if it meant running for the rest of your life. Even then, Lena met his gaze steadily. I would have run forever if it meant keeping him safe. Victor nodded slowly, processing this. What else? His first word, his first steps? I want to know all of it. So Lena told him. About how Ethan's first word had been mama at 10 months, spoken with such perfect clarity that she'd burst into tears. About his first steps at 13 months, how he'd wobbled across their tiny Seattle apartment and fallen directly into a laundry basket. About his obsession with dinosaurs that had started at age 2 and showed no signs of fading. About the way he laughed, this full-body giggle that made everything else fade away. About his stubborn streak that was pure Victor, his kindness that she hoped was from her, his fearless curiosity that was probably from both of them. Victor listened without interrupting, his expression growing more complex with every story. Pain, longing, anger, grief, all of it cycling across his features like weather patterns. He sounds remarkable, Victor said when she finally ran out of stories. He is, Lena agreed softly. He's the best part of me, the only part that really matters. And me? Victor's voice was carefully neutral. Does he ever ask about me? About his father? Lena's stomach twisted. Sometimes. Usually I tell him his father lives far away, that it's complicated. He's 4. He accepts the answers I give him without pushing too hard. But that won't last forever. No, Victor agreed. It won't. Eventually, he'll want more than vague explanations. And what will you tell him then? That his father is a criminal? That you were protecting him from a monster? I never thought you were a monster, Lena said quietly. If I had, I never would have fallen in love with you in the first place. Victor looked at her sharply. Loved. Past tense. Lena didn't answer, couldn't answer, because the truth was complicated and messy, and she wasn't ready to examine it too closely. Yes, she'd loved Victor, desperately, completely, with a passion that had terrified her even as it consumed her. But that was 5 years ago. 5 years of distance and growth and building a life without him. She wasn't the same scared 24-year-old who'd fled in the night. She'd become someone stronger, someone capable, someone who didn't need a man, even one as powerful as Victor Romano, to survive. But sitting here, watching him process the loss of 4 years with his son, seeing the genuine emotion beneath the carefully controlled exterior, something stirred, something dangerous. "What do you want from us, Victor?" she asked, changing the subject before he could push. "Really? You found us. You know about Ethan. What happens now?" Victor set down his glass with deliberate care. "I want to know my son. I want to be part of his life. And I want—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I want you to stop running, both of you." "We're not going back to your world," Lena said immediately. "That's non-negotiable." "I'm not asking you to." Victor leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "My world has changed, Lena. I've changed. The business is different now, more legitimate. I've been working for the past 3 years to transition away from the violent side of things. It's not perfect, not completely clean, but it's better, safer." Lena wanted to believe him. Some foolish part of her wanted desperately to believe him. But she'd heard Victor's promises before, and she knew how quickly they could dissolve when reality intruded. "Words are easy," she said. "Proof is harder." "Then let me prove it," Victor said. "Give me a chance to show you I'm not the same man you ran from. Let me get to know Ethan. Let me, He stopped, recalibrated. "I'm not asking for everything at once. I know I can't undo 5 years in a day. But I'm asking for a chance, that's all." Lena studied him, searching for the manipulation, the angle, but all she saw was sincerity, raw and unguarded in a way Victor never used to be. "Supervised visits," she said finally. "Short ones, with me present at all times. And the first sign that this is harmful to Ethan, the first indication that your world is bleeding into his, we're done. I'll disappear again, and this time you won't find us." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "You think you could run from me twice?" "I know I could," Lena said with more confidence than she felt. "Because I've gotten better too, Victor. 5 years of staying ahead of you taught me things, made me smarter, more careful. I won't let you cage us. Not again." For a moment she thought he might argue, might push back with the full force of his considerable will, but instead Victor nodded slowly. "Supervised visits," he agreed. "On your terms, at your pace. I don't like it, but I understand it, and I'll accept it. For now." The "for now" carried weight, a reminder that this was a temporary concession, not a permanent solution. But it was more than Lena had expected, and for the moment, it was enough. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." Victor's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. "I need to take this. Business." "I should go anyway." Lena stood, suddenly exhausted. "It's late, and I need to relieve Mrs. Chen. I'll have my driver take you home." "I can take a cab." "Lena," Victor stood as well, and the look on his face was almost pleading. "Let me do this. Please. It's late. You're tired. And I need to know you made it home safely." The concern in his voice undid something in Lena's chest. This was the Victor she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd shown her glimpses of tenderness beneath the ruthless exterior, the one she'd hoped he could become if the violence ever stopped. "Fine," she said softly. "Thank you." Victor made a call, brief and to the point, then walked her to the door. He paused before opening it, his hand on the handle, his body close enough that Lena could feel the heat of him. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "I'm not the same man I was, and I'm going to prove it to you, to both of you." Lena looked up at him, at the face she'd once known better than her own, now marked by time and distance and the weight of everything between them. "I hope you can," she whispered. "For Ethan's sake. I really hope you can." Then she stepped past him into the hallway, where Victor's driver waited to escort her home, back to the apartment where her son slept and her carefully constructed life continued to crumble, one revelation at a time. The first visit happened 3 days later, on a Wednesday afternoon at the public park 2 blocks from Lena's apartment. "Neutral ground," she'd insisted. Somewhere open and populated, where Victor's presence wouldn't feel quite so overwhelming, where Ethan could run and play if things got awkward. Lena arrived early with Ethan in tow, her son chattering excitedly about the swings and the slide and whether they could get ice cream after. He had no idea why they were really there, and Lena intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. Let him think this was just another park day. Let him stay innocent for a few more hours. Victor arrived exactly on time, emerging from a different vehicle this time. A sleek black sedan instead of the SUV, less conspicuous but still expensive enough to turn heads. He dressed down for the occasion, trading his usual tailored suits for dark jeans and a gray Henley that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. Approachable was clearly not a look Victor Romano wore comfortably. "Mama, is that the man from the coffee shop?" Ethan had spotted him immediately, his dark eyes tracking Victor's approach with open curiosity. Lena's throat tightened. "Yes, baby. He's a friend of Mama's. He wanted to come play at the park with us today. Is that okay?" Ethan considered this with the seriousness of a 4-year-old weighing important matters. "Does he like swings?" "I don't know," Lena said honestly. "Why don't you ask him?" Victor reached them, and for a moment he just stood there looking at Ethan with an expression so raw it made Lena's chest ache. This was his son, his child, and he was meeting him properly for the first time, trying to figure out how to be a father when he'd missed the entire instruction manual. "Hello, Ethan," Victor said, his voice careful and controlled. "Hi." Ethan beamed up at him with the fearless friendliness of a child who'd been taught the world was safe. "Do you like swings? I'm really good at them. I can go super high." "I haven't been on a swing in a very long time," Victor admitted, and something about the honesty in his voice made Lena soften slightly. "But I'd like to watch you, if that's okay." "Okay." Ethan grabbed Lena's hand. "Come on, Mama. Let's show him." The next hour passed in a surreal haze of normalcy. Ethan demonstrated his swinging prowess, his sliding technique, his ability to climb the jungle gym. "Almost to the very top, Mama. Look." Victor watched it all with the focused attention of someone committing every detail to memory, occasionally offering quiet encouragement or answering Ethan's endless stream of questions with a patience Lena hadn't known he possessed. "What's your favorite dinosaur?" Ethan asked at one point, hanging upside down from the monkey bars with absolutely no sense of self-preservation. "I don't think I have one," Victor said, glancing at Lena with something that might have been helplessness. "Everyone has a favorite dinosaur," Ethan insisted. "Mine's a T-Rex because they're the strongest, but Mama likes Triceratops because they have horns and protected their families." Victor's eyes met Lena's over their son's head, and the weight of that statement hung between them. Protected their families. Was that what she'd been doing? Or had she been running from protection, mistaking control for care? "Then I like velociraptors," Victor said finally, "because they were smart and worked in packs. They took care of each other." Ethan considered this, then nodded approvingly. "That's a good one. Not as good as T-Rex, but good." Lena found herself smiling despite everything, despite the tension coiled in her shoulders, despite the constant awareness of Victor's presence like a magnetic field she couldn't escape. Ethan was happy. That was what mattered. Whatever complicated mess existed between her and Victor, at least for this moment, their son was just a little boy playing at a park. After the playground, they moved to a nearby bench. Ethan raced off to investigate a patch of dandelions, giving the adults a moment of relative privacy. "Thank you," Victor said quietly, "for this. For letting me—" He gestured vaguely at Ethan. "He's incredible." "He is," Lena agreed, watching her son pick dandelions with intense concentration. "He's everything good that could have come from us." "From us," Victor repeated, and the words carried weight. "Do you ever think about what we were, before everything went wrong?" Lena didn't answer immediately. The truth was, she thought about it constantly, in the quiet moments when Ethan was asleep and she was alone with her thoughts. She thought about the early days when Victor had been intense and overwhelming, but also protective and passionate, when she'd felt safer with him than she ever had in her life, even as some part of her recognized the danger. "Sometimes," she admitted finally, "but that was a different life, different people." "Were we so different?" Victor challenged. "Or did we just run before we figured out how to make it work?" I ran, Lena corrected. You would have locked me in a tower and called it love. Maybe, Victor conceded, but I would have kept you safe. Both of you. Safe and suffocated are two different things. Victor turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I want to show you something. My life now. What I've built. Will you come with me? Both of you? Every instinct Lena had screamed danger, going anywhere with Victor, seeing his world, letting him pull them deeper into his orbit. It was everything she'd been avoiding for 5 years. Victor, I don't think, oh, please. The word was simple, unadorned. One afternoon. Let me show you that things are different, that I'm different. And if after that you still want to keep me at arm's length, I'll accept it. But give me a chance to prove what I've been telling you. Lena looked at Ethan, still absorbed in his dandelion collection, then back at Victor. This was a mistake. She knew it with every fiber of her being, but she also knew that Victor wouldn't stop pushing, wouldn't accept the boundaries she was trying to maintain, unless she gave him this. One afternoon, she said finally, but the second I'm uncomfortable, the second this feels wrong, we leave. No arguments. No arguments, Victor agreed. That was how Lena found herself 2 days later, sitting in Victor's town car with Ethan buckled into a car seat that had definitely not been there the last time she'd been in one of his vehicles. The attention to detail should have reassured her. Instead, it reminded her how quickly Victor moved, how thoroughly he planned, how completely he thought through every angle. They drove for 20 minutes, leaving the city proper for a residential area Lena didn't recognize. The houses grew larger, the lots more spacious, until they pulled through iron gates into a property that made her breath catch. The house was beautiful in an understated way, modern lines and clean architecture, surrounded by mature trees and carefully landscaped grounds. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth or power. It looked like a home where a family might live, not a fortress where a crime boss held court. You live here? Lena couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. I moved here about 2 years ago, Victor said as they pulled to a stop in the circular drive. The penthouse felt too isolated, too much like... He stopped. Like a cage. The word choice wasn't accidental, and they both knew it. Ethan was already unbuckling himself, his eyes wide as he took in the enormous yard. Mama, there's so much space. Can I explore? Stay where I can see you, Lena said automatically, and Ethan took off running toward what looked like a garden path. Victor led Lena inside, and if the exterior had been surprising, the interior was more so. It was furnished but not overly decorated, with the kind of comfortable elegance that spoke of someone who lived there rather than just using it as a showpiece. There were books on shelves, art on walls that looked chosen rather than curated, even a pair of running shoes kicked off by the door like Victor had just gotten home from a jog. It's different, Lena said, because the admission felt safer than examining why the domesticity of it all made her chest tight. I told you things had changed. Victor moved toward the kitchen, a massive space with restaurant-grade appliances and a breakfast bar that could seat 6. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? Wine? Water's fine. Lena perched on one of the bar stools, watching through the windows as Ethan investigated the garden with boundless energy. Victor, why did you bring us here? What are you trying to prove? Victor poured 2 glasses of water from a built-in dispenser, sliding one across the counter to her. I'm trying to show you that I'm not who I was 5 years ago, that I've built something different, something that could include you and Ethan if you let it. Include us how? Lena's fingers tightened around her glass. As what? Your hidden family? Your guilty secret? As my family, Victor said simply. No hiding, no secrets. Just us, the way we should have been from the beginning. We can't go back, Lena said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm not asking to go back. Victor came around the counter, and Lena fought the urge to put more distance between them. I'm asking to go forward, differently, on your terms, at your pace, but together, for Ethan's sake, if nothing else. This is about more than Ethan. Lena forced herself to meet his gaze. Don't pretend otherwise. You want back what you lost. I want everything, Victor interrupted, his voice low and intense. I want my son. I want the woman I loved. I want the life I should have had if I hadn't been too proud and controlling to give you the freedom you needed. Yes, this is about Ethan. But it's also about us, Lena. About what we were and what we could be if we both try. The honesty of it stole her breath. This was Victor, without the armor, without the careful control, just raw want and vulnerability, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "I don't know if I can do this," Lena whispered. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "Then don't, not yet." Victor's hand came to rest on the counter near hers, not touching but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "Start with letting me know Ethan. Let me prove I can be a father, that I can put his needs first, and maybe, eventually, you'll see that I can do the same for you." Before Lena could respond, Ethan came barreling through the back door, his face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Mama, there's a treehouse! Can I go see, please?" Lena looked at Victor, who had the grace to appear slightly sheepish. "I had it built last week. I hoped you might bring him here eventually." Of course he did. Victor Romano, always 3 steps ahead, always planning for contingencies. The old resentment flared, but it was tempered now by something else, by the understanding that he'd built a treehouse for a son he barely knew, hoping for a chance to use it. "Fine," she said, "but I'm coming with you." The treehouse was elaborate, more like a small cottage, elevated 15 feet off the ground, with a rope bridge and a slide for quick exits. It had windows with actual glass, built-in benches, even what looked like electrical outlets for lights. Ethan was in heaven, racing from one feature to the next with shrieks of delight. "This is insane," Lena said as she climbed up behind her son, Victor following. "This is a full house, in a tree." "I may have gone overboard," Victor admitted, "but I kept thinking about what a 4-year-old would like, and I couldn't decide, so I just included everything." Despite herself, Lena laughed. It was absurd and excessive and so completely Victor, solving problems by throwing resources at them until they bent to his will. Except this time it wasn't about control. It was about making his son happy. They spent an hour in the treehouse, Ethan showing them all the features he'd discovered, making up elaborate games that involved both adults in ways that were increasingly ridiculous. Victor played along with the kind of serious commitment that would have been funny if it wasn't so touching, pretending to be a dragon, then a knight, then a T-Rex with equal gravitas. "You're good at this," Lena said quietly, while Ethan was distracted with arranging stuffed animals he'd found in a storage chest. "At what?" "Being a dad. It comes naturally to you." Victor looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "It doesn't feel natural. It feels like I'm faking it and hoping he doesn't notice." "That's what parenting is," Lena said with a small smile. "Faking it until you figure out what you're doing, usually about the time they become teenagers and everything changes again." They shared a look, a moment of connection that felt dangerous in its intimacy. This was what Lena had been afraid of. Not the violence of Victor's world, not the danger, but this. The way he could still make her feel things, still make her wonder what if, still make her want things she'd convinced herself were dead and buried. Her phone rang, shattering the moment. Unknown number. Lena's stomach dropped as she answered. "Miss Hart," an unfamiliar male voice, clipped and professional. "This is Detective Morrison with the police department. We need you to come down to the station. There's been an incident involving your apartment." The world tilted. "What kind of incident?" "It appears there was a break-in. Your neighbor called it in when she saw the door was damaged. We need you to come identify if anything's missing and file a report." Lena's mind raced. A break-in. Today. While she was conveniently away from home with Victor. The timing was too perfect, too suspicious. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said, her voice tight. She ended the call and looked at Victor, who was already standing, his expression gone cold and hard. "What happened?" "My apartment was broken into." Lena gathered Ethan into her arms, sudden fear making her movement sharp. "I need to go, now." "I'm coming with you." "Victor, don't." His voice was flat, absolute. "Don't even try to argue. Someone broke into your home while you were with me. That's not coincidence. That's a message. And I'm sure as hell not letting you walk into whatever this is alone." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard for. But Victor was right. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had known she'd be gone, had known exactly when to strike. And that meant someone had been watching. The drive to her apartment was tense and silent, except for Ethan's questions, which Lena deflected with increasingly strained cheerfulness. Victor made several phone calls in rapid succession, his voice low and clipped, speaking in the kind of shorthand that suggested the people on the other end knew exactly what he needed without extensive explanation. 2 police cars were parked outside Lena's building when they arrived, along with what looked like half her neighbors congregated on the sidewalk. Mrs. Chen spotted her immediately and rushed over. "Oh, Lena, thank goodness you're all right. I came by to drop off some vegetables and saw your door was kicked in. I called the police immediately." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Lena's hands shook as she took in the scene. Her front door hung at an angle, the frame splintered where someone had forced it open. Would you mind watching Ethan, just for a few minutes while I talk to the police?" Of course, of course." Mrs. Chen reached for Ethan, who went willingly, distracted by the excitement of police cars and flashing lights. Lena started toward the building, Victor a solid presence at her back. A uniformed officer intercepted them at the entrance. "Ms. Hart, I'm Officer Davis. Detective Morrison is upstairs in your apartment. If you'll follow me..." His eyes flicked to Victor, clearly recognizing him, or at least recognizing the type of man he was. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. I'll need to ask you to wait here." "He's with me," Lena said, before Victor could respond. "He's family." The lie came easier than it should have, but it got them past the officer and up the stairs to her apartment. The damage was worse than Lena had feared. Someone hadn't just broken in. They'd torn the place apart. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, cushions slashed. It was methodical destruction, the kind designed to send a message rather than steal valuables. "Ms. Hart," a man in a rumpled suit approached, his badge clipped to his belt. "I'm Detective Morrison. Can you take a look around and tell me if anything appears to be missing?" Lena moved through her destroyed home in a daze. Her laptop was still on the coffee table, untouched. Her small TV, her jewelry box, the emergency cash she kept in a kitchen drawer, all of it still there. Whoever had done this hadn't been looking for valuables. They'd been looking for information. "My documents," Lena said suddenly, rushing to the bedroom. The filing cabinet where she kept her papers, Ethan's birth certificate, their social security cards, her carefully maintained false identities from the early days, had been pried open, its contents scattered across the floor. "What's missing?" Victor's voice was deadly quiet. "Nothing." Lena sorted through the papers with shaking hands. "Everything's here. They went through it, but they didn't take anything." "Because they weren't stealing," Victor said. "They were copying, photographing, getting information." Detective Morrison looked between them, his expression sharpening. "Do you have reason to believe this was targeted? That someone was specifically looking for information about you?" Lena opened her mouth, closed it. How did she explain this without explaining everything? Without revealing that she'd been running from Victor Romano for 5 years? That her entire identity was a carefully constructed lie? That bringing the truth into the open would unravel everything she'd built? "Yes," Victor said before she could formulate a response. "This was targeted, and I know who ordered it." "Victor, don't," Lena started, but he cut her off with a look. "Detective Morrison, I think we should continue this conversation at the station. There are some complicating factors that Ms. Hart and I need to discuss with you privately." The detective's eyes narrowed. "What kind of complicating factors?" "The kind that involve my son's safety," Victor said flatly. "And that's all I'm saying here." An hour later, Lena found herself in an interrogation room at the police station, Victor beside her, while Detective Morrison listened to an edited version of their story. Victor had taken over the narrative with the kind of smooth authority that suggested he'd done this before, laying out just enough truth to be credible while omitting the more legally questionable details of his business. "So let me get this straight," Morrison said when Victor finished. "You two were in a relationship 5 years ago. Ms. Hart left while pregnant without informing you. She's been living under an assumed identity." "Legal identity," Victor corrected. "Lena Hart is her legal name. She changed it formally." "Fine. Legal identity. And now that you found her and discovered you have a son, someone breaks into her apartment while she's conveniently with you. And you believe this was done by someone in your organization to send a message." "Not someone in my organization," Victor said carefully. "Someone who wants to destabilize my organization. Someone who would see a previously unknown child as leverage." Lena felt sick. This was exactly what she'd feared, exactly why she'd run. Ethan wasn't even in Victor's world yet, and already people were using him as a weapon. "I want protection for them," Victor continued. Full security detail, 24 hours. I'll pay for it myself if the department won't authorize it. Mr. Romano, I appreciate your concern, but we don't have the resources to provide round-the-clock protection based on theoretical threats. If you have specific evidence that someone intends to harm Ms. Hart or your son, then it'll be too late, Victor cut him off. You know how this works, detective. You know what I do, even if you can't prove half of it. And you know that people in my world don't make empty threats. Someone broke into that apartment looking for information about my son. They now have his full name, his date of birth, probably his social security number. They know where he goes to school, where he plays, where he's vulnerable. And you want me to wait for specific evidence of intent? Morrison sighed, rubbing his temples. What exactly are you proposing? Let me provide the security, private team, fully vetted, operating within legal boundaries. They'll coordinate with your department, follow all protocols, but they'll be there, preventing the threat instead of responding to it. And Ms. Hart? Morrison looked at Lena. Are you comfortable with this arrangement? Was she? Having Victor's security team watching over her and Ethan meant surrendering the independence she'd fought for, meant admitting that maybe she couldn't protect her son alone anymore. But it also meant keeping Ethan safe, and that trumped everything else. Yes, she said quietly. I'm comfortable with it. Morrison spent another 30 minutes going over details, taking statements, making it clear that if anything illegal happened involving this private security team, the police would come down hard on everyone involved. Victor agreed to everything with the calm patience of someone who'd navigated law enforcement bureaucracy many times before. By the time they left the station, it was getting dark. Mrs. Chen had taken Ethan to her apartment, fed him dinner, and settled him in front of cartoons. Lena collected her son with profound gratitude and apologies for the disruption. It's no trouble at all, Mrs. Chen insisted. That sweet boy is always welcome here. But Lena, dear, your apartment. Where will you stay tonight? The question hung in the air. Lena's apartment was a crime scene, uninhabitable even after the police finished processing it. She had no family nearby, few friends close enough to impose on with a 4-year-old in tow. A hotel, she said. We'll find a hotel. You'll stay with me, Victor said, his tone brooking no argument. The house has plenty of room, it's secure, and you've already seen it. Ethan liked the treehouse. Victor, I can't. You can, and you will. His voice softened slightly. Please, Lena. Let me do this. Let me keep you both safe, at least for tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. Lena looked down at Ethan, who was half asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from the day's events. She thought about hotels with questionable locks, about being alone with her son, while someone out there had their information, about trying to maintain the independence that was looking more like foolish pride with every passing hour. One night, she said finally. Just one night. But as Victor led them to his car, as she buckled Ethan into the car seat that had appeared like magic, as she settled into the passenger seat and felt the weight of Victor's protection settle around them like a blanket, Lena knew she was lying to herself. This wasn't going to be one night. This was the beginning of something bigger, something that terrified her even as part of her desperately wanted it. Victor was back in their lives, and the careful walls she'd built to keep him out were crumbling faster than she could repair them. The question now wasn't whether they would become part of Victor's world. It was whether she could maintain any control over how it happened, or if she'd already lost that battle the moment he'd stepped out of that black SUV at the farmer's market. As they drove through the darkening streets toward Victor's house, toward the life he was offering, Lena held her sleeping son and tried not to think about how easy it would be to surrender. How tempting it was to let someone else carry the weight for a while, even if that someone was the man she'd spent 5 years running from. Control versus choice. Safety versus freedom. Love versus fear. The reckoning she'd been dreading had arrived, and Lena had no idea which side would win. One night became 3, then a week, then 2. Lena told herself it was temporary, that as soon as her apartment was repaired and the immediate threat assessed, they'd leave. But Victor's house had a way of making temporary feel permanent, and Ethan had settled in with the adaptability of childhood, treating the sprawling property like the greatest adventure of his young life. The guest suite Victor had given them was larger than Lena's entire apartment, with a bedroom for her, a connecting room for Ethan, and a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in. Ethan had claimed the treehouse as his personal kingdom, spending hours out there with the dinosaur figures Victor kept mysteriously producing. One new addition appearing every few days like offerings at an altar. Victor himself was everywhere and nowhere, present but not intrusive, giving them space while making his availability clear. He worked from home most days, his office door always open, always ready when Ethan came barreling in with questions or discoveries or elaborate stories that made no sense but demanded an audience. And slowly, carefully, he was becoming a fixture in their lives in a way that terrified Lena, even as it felt inevitably right. "Mama, can Victor read me a story tonight?" Ethan asked one evening after dinner, his face hopeful in that way that made refusing impossible. Lena glanced at Victor, who'd frozen in the act of loading the dishwasher, his expression carefully neutral. They'd developed a routine over the past 2 weeks. Lena handled bedtime, Victor kept his distance, maintaining the boundaries she'd insisted on. But Ethan was starting to push against those boundaries, seeking out the man who'd become a constant presence, and Lena knew she couldn't keep them apart forever. "If Victor has time," she said carefully, "it's up to him." "I have time," Victor said immediately, and the naked hope in his voice made Lena's chest tight. "What book do you want?" Ethan raced off to retrieve his current favorite, a picture book about dinosaurs that he'd already memorized, leaving the adults alone in the kitchen. Victor turned to Lena, his expression serious. "Is this okay? I don't want to overstep." "You're his father," Lena said, the words still strange on her tongue. "Reading him a bedtime story isn't overstepping. It's what fathers do." Something shifted in Victor's expression, gratitude mixed with something deeper. "Thank you for letting me do this, for letting me be here." "You didn't give me much choice," Lena said, but there was no heat in it. "I gave you every choice," Victor countered quietly. "You're the one who decided to stay." The truth of it hung between them, uncomfortable and undeniable. Lena could have left by now, could have found another apartment, could have rebuilt the walls, could have reduced Victor to supervised visits in public parks. But she hadn't. She'd stayed, letting Ethan get attached, letting herself get comfortable, letting the life Victor was offering wrap around them like a warm coat on a cold day. Ethan returned with his book, and Victor followed him upstairs to the bedroom that had slowly accumulated more of Ethan's things: clothes in the drawers, toys on the shelves, drawings taped to the walls. Lena lingered in the hallway, listening to Victor's deep voice reading about Stegosaurus and Brachiosaurus. Ethan interrupting with facts he'd learned, Victor patiently answering questions he'd probably answered a dozen times before. This was dangerous. This feeling of rightness, of family, of belonging. Lena had spent 5 years protecting herself and Ethan from exactly this scenario, and now she was letting it happen, letting them build connections that would devastate her son if they had to leave. When had staying become harder than leaving? Victor emerged 20 minutes later, closing Ethan's door with careful quietness. "He's out. Kid has the ability to go from full speed to unconscious in about 30 seconds. "It's a gift," Lena agreed, smiling despite herself. "Thank you for reading to him. He loved it." "So did I." Victor moved past her toward the stairs, then paused. "Lena, can we talk? There's something I need to discuss with you." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach drop, but she followed him downstairs to his office, a room she'd carefully avoided over the past 2 weeks. It was exactly what she'd expected, masculine and efficient, with built-in bookshelves, a massive desk, and windows overlooking the back garden. But there were also photos now, recent additions that made her throat tight. Pictures of Ethan at the park, in the treehouse, one candid shot of all 3 of them that Victor's security must have taken without her noticing. "We look like a family," Lena said quietly, studying the photo. "We are a family," Victor corrected, "whether you want to admit it or not." Lena turned to face him, crossing her arms defensively. "What did you want to talk about?" Victor pulled a folder from his desk drawer, setting it between them. "I found out who ordered the break-in, who's been looking into you and Ethan." Fear spiked through her. "Who?" "Marcus DeLuca. He runs territory on the east side, has ambitions that exceed his capabilities. He found out about Ethan somehow, decided that information was valuable enough to pursue." Victor's voice was cold, controlled. "He made a mistake." What kind of mistake? Lena's hands were shaking. This was what she'd feared, what she'd run from. Her son reduced to a chess piece in someone else's game. The kind where he underestimated how far I'd go to protect what's mine, Victor said flatly. He's no longer a threat. To you, to Ethan, to anyone. The implications of that statement made Lena feel sick. Victor, what did you do? What I had to do. His expression was unreadable. I made it very clear that my son is off limits, that anyone who even looks at him wrong will have to answer to me personally. The message has been received. By hurting people. Lena backed away, the reality of Victor's world crashing down on the domestic fantasies she'd been living. By using violence. By protecting my family, Victor countered. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed having to remind people why they fear me? I've spent 3 years trying to move away from that life, trying to build something legitimate. But I won't risk Ethan's safety for appearances. Not ever. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Lena said, her voice rising. This is why I ran. Because in your world, protection means violence, safety means fear, and family means what? Victor cut her off, his own control starting to fracture. Means I do whatever it takes to keep you safe? Means I don't apologize for eliminating threats? You can judge me all you want, Lena, but don't pretend you don't benefit from it. You and Ethan are safe right now precisely because people know what I'm capable of. We were safe before, Lena shot back. We were fine living our quiet life before you found us. Were you? Victor moved closer, his intensity focused entirely on her. You were hiding, constantly looking over your shoulder, moving every time you felt exposed. You call that safe? You call that fine? Your son didn't even know his own name for the first year of his life because you were so paranoid about being found. That's not safety, Lena. That's survival. And they're not the same thing. The words hit harder than Lena wanted to admit. Because he was right, wasn't he? She'd been surviving, not living, running instead of building roots, teaching Ethan to be cautious instead of confident, all in the name of protection that now felt more like prison. I did what I thought was right, she said, hating how defensive she sounded. So did I. Victor's voice softened slightly. I'm not asking you to approve of my methods. I'm just asking you to trust that everything I do for you and Ethan, to keep you safe, to give you the life you deserve. The life you think we deserve, Lena corrected. You're still making decisions for us, Victor, still controlling the situation. Then tell me what you want. The frustration in his voice was raw, unfiltered. Tell me what would make you feel like you have control, like you have choices. I've given you space. I've respected your boundaries. I've let you set the pace. What more do you want from me? I want honesty, Lena's voice cracked. I want you to stop pretending you've changed when you're still solving problems with violence and intimidation. I want you to admit that bringing us into your life puts Ethan in danger instead of pretending you can eliminate every threat. She stopped, swallowed hard. I want to know if you're capable of putting us first or if we're just another thing you own. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor stared at her, something breaking in his expression, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You're not a thing I own. You're the woman I love, the mother of my son, the person who's haunted every decision I've made for the past 5 years. And yes, I'm capable of putting you first. I already do, every single day. Lena felt tears burn behind her eyes. You don't love me, Victor. You love the idea of me, the woman who fit into your world, who didn't ask too many questions, who was content to be protected and possessed. I'm not her anymore. I don't know if I can be. I don't want you to be, Victor said, and the honesty in his voice made her chest ache. I fell in love with a woman who challenged me, who made me question everything, who was brave enough to run when I gave her no other choice. That's who you are, Lena. That's who you've always been. And that's exactly who I want. Even if it means giving up control, Lena challenged. Even if it means letting me make decisions you disagree with. Even then, Victor moved closer, and Lena found she didn't want to step back. I know I have a problem with control. I know I default to making decisions instead of asking, but I'm trying, Lena. Every day I'm trying to be better, to be the man you need instead of the man I've always been. I see you trying, Lena admitted quietly. With Ethan. The way you let him lead conversations, let him make choices about what games to play, what stories to read. You're patient with him in a way I never expected. He makes it easy, Victor said. He's everything I didn't know I wanted. Every time he laughs, every time he shows me something he's discovered, every time he falls asleep holding my hand because I'm reading him stories, his voice roughened. It breaks me, Lena, in the best possible way. He breaks me open and reminds me there's more to life than control and power and fear. Lena's defenses crumbled a little more. This was the Victor she'd glimpsed 5 years ago, the man beneath the ruthless exterior, the one capable of tenderness and vulnerability when he allowed himself to be. He asks about you, she said softly, about whether you're his daddy. I keep deflecting, but he's getting more insistent. 4-year-olds are relentless when they want answers. Victor's expression did something complicated. What do you tell him? That it's complicated, that grown-up stuff is hard to explain, the usual parental dodge. Lena moved to the window, looking out at the garden where Ethan played every day. But he deserves the truth. He deserves to know who you are. Then tell him, Victor said simply. Tell him I'm his father, that I want to be part of his life, that I love him more than I knew it was possible to love anything. And us? Lena turned to face him. What do I tell him about us? Victor closed the distance between them, and Lena's heart hammered in her chest. He was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the heat of him, could remember with visceral clarity what it had been like to be held by him, loved by him, consumed by him. Tell him we're figuring it out, Victor said quietly. Tell him his parents are learning how to be a family. Tell him... He stopped, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Tell him whatever you're comfortable with. But, Lena, please, don't tell him we're nothing. Don't tell him this is temporary, because I can't accept that. I won't. Victor, his name came out shaky, uncertain. I love you, he said, and the words landed like an earthquake. I've loved you since the moment you walked into my life and refused to be intimidated. I loved you when you ran, and I loved you every day you were gone. And I love you now, even though you're standing here questioning everything about us. You can doubt me all you want. You can push back and fight me and set 1,000 boundaries. But don't doubt that. Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there feeling 5 years of walls crumble, 5 years of protection dissolve, 5 years of careful distance evaporate like morning fog. I'm terrified, she whispered. I'm terrified of loving you again and losing myself. I'm terrified of letting Ethan get attached and then having to leave. I'm terrified that this... She gestured vaguely at the house, at the life they'd been building, is all an illusion that'll shatter the moment reality intrudes. Then be terrified with me, Victor said, because I'm scared too. I'm scared I'll revert to old habits and drive you away. I'm scared I'll fail Ethan, fail you, fail at being the man you both need. But I'd rather be terrified and trying than safe and alone. The honesty undid her completely. This was Victor without armor, without the carefully constructed persona, just a man who'd found his family and was desperately trying not to lose them again. How could she fight that? How could she maintain her distance when he was offering her everything she'd ever wanted, wrapped in the very thing she feared most? I didn't stop loving you, Lena admitted, the words painful and liberating at once. I tried. I spent 5 years trying, but every time I looked at Ethan, I saw you. And every time I saw you in him, I remembered why I fell in love with you in the first place. Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch reverent. Then stop fighting this. Stop running. Stay. Not because you're afraid or because it's convenient, but because it's what you want. What we both want. I don't know if I can, Lena said, even as she leaned into his touch. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're the strongest person I know, Victor said. You survived my world and escaped it. You raised our son alone, protected him, built a life from nothing. You're capable of anything, Lena, including this, including us. The space between them evaporated as Victor pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers in a gesture so intimate it made her ache. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, existing in the same space, neither willing to close the final distance, but neither able to pull away. "Tell me what you need," Victor murmured. "Tell me what would make you feel safe enough to try." Lena pulled back slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. "I need you to prove that Ethan comes first. Not your business, not your pride, not your need for control. Him. Always him." "Done," Victor said without hesitation. "What else?" "I need autonomy. Decisions about Ethan, about us, about our lives. They have to be joint decisions. Not you informing me, not you manipulating circumstances. Real discussions where my voice matters as much as yours." "Agreed." Victor's hand moved to the small of her back, holding her steady. "Keep going." "I need transparency. If there are threats, if your business creates danger, I need to know. No protecting me from information because you think I can't handle it. Trust me to be strong enough to face reality." "That one's harder," Victor admitted. "My instinct is to shield you from everything dark. But I understand. I'll try." "Trying isn't enough," Lena said firmly. "Either you commit to honesty or this doesn't work." Victor was quiet for a moment, warring with himself. Then he nodded slowly. "Full transparency. Even when it scares me. Even when I think keeping you in the dark would be easier. You're right. You deserve to know what you're facing." Lena searched his expression for deception, for the calculation she'd learned to recognize. But all she saw was sincerity, raw and unguarded. "And if it doesn't work?" she asked quietly. "If we try and it falls apart anyway?" "Then we tried," Victor said. "And Ethan will still have both parents who love him. We'll figure out co-parenting, visitation, whatever it takes. But Lena," his grip tightened slightly, "I don't plan on failing. I don't plan on giving you any reason to leave again. Because losing you once nearly destroyed me. Losing you a second time would finish the job." The vulnerability in those words broke something open in Lena's chest. This was what she'd needed to hear. Not promises of perfection, but acknowledgement of risk, commitment despite fear, honesty about what failure might mean. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. We try, really try. Not me staying out of fear or convenience, but actively building something together." The smile that crossed Victor's face was brilliant and devastating. "Yeah?" "Yeah," Lena managed a shaky laugh. "Though I reserve the right to panic and overthink and occasionally remind you of every reason this is a terrible idea." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Victor said, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and familiar and new all at once. It was gentle and desperate, restrained and consuming, everything they'd been and everything they could become compressed into a single moment of connection. Lena kissed him back, 5 years of distance dissolving, and let herself feel everything she'd been suppressing. The want, the fear, the hope, the love that had never really died, just gone dormant, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. They broke apart slowly, breathless, and Lena rested her head against Victor's chest, listening to his heartbeat thunder beneath her ear. "We should probably set some ground rules," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "For Ethan's sake. We can't just jump into this without considering how it affects him." "What kind of ground rules?" Victor's hand traced patterns on her back, soothing and possessive at once. "We take it slow. Let him adjust to the idea of us together without overwhelming him. And we wait to tell him you're his father until we're sure this is stable." Lena pulled back to look at him. "I won't let him get attached to the idea of having a dad just to have that ripped away if things don't work out." Pain flashed across Victor's face. "You really think I'd let that happen? That I'd walk away from my son?" "No," Lena said honestly. "But relationships are complicated. People who love each other still sometimes can't make it work. I just want to protect him from getting hurt." "Then we make sure it works," Victor said with the absolute certainty of someone used to bending reality to his will. "We commit. We compromise. We fight like hell to build something that lasts." It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," Victor interrupted. "We decide what we want and we make it happen, together, as partners, the way we should have done 5 years ago." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways it could go wrong, all the obstacles they'd have to overcome. But looking at Victor's face, seeing the determination there mixed with hope and love and something that looked almost like faith, She found she didn't want to fight anymore. Together, she agreed softly. As partners. The kiss that followed was different from the first. Less desperate, more certain. A promise being sealed rather than a question being asked. And when they finally pulled apart, Lena felt something shift inside her, some fundamental rearrangement of her priorities and fears and hopes. She was still terrified, still uncertain, still convinced this might all explode in her face. But for the first time in 5 years, she was willing to take the risk. That night, after Victor had reluctantly retreated to his own room and Lena had checked on Ethan for the third time, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of 2 weeks, her entire life had been upended. The apartment she'd called home was destroyed. The independence she'd prized was compromised. The walls she'd built were crumbling. And yet, she was safer than she'd been in years. Ethan was happier than she'd ever seen him. And she was not happy, not yet, but something close to it, something that felt like possibility. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Victor, even though he was just down the hall. "Thank you for giving us a chance, for trusting me with your heart again. I won't waste it." Lena stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Don't make me regret this." The response came immediately. "I won't. I promise." Lena set the phone aside and closed her eyes, letting herself imagine a future where this worked, where Ethan grew up with both parents, where she and Victor built something real and lasting, where the love that had once consumed them could become something healthier, more balanced, more sustainable. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But as she drifted off to sleep, for the first time in 5 years, Lena wasn't planning her next escape route. She wasn't mapping out contingencies or preparing for the worst. She was simply allowing herself to hope. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, might be the bravest thing she'd ever done. 3 months later, Lena woke to sunlight streaming through windows that now felt like home, and the sound of her son's laughter echoing from somewhere downstairs. She stretched lazily, allowing herself the luxury of a slow morning, something that would have been impossible in her old life of constant vigilance and exhaustion. The bed beside her was empty, but still warm, Victor's absence explained by the voices drifting up from the kitchen. She could hear him talking to Ethan, their conversation punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the beep of the coffee maker. Domestic sounds. Normal sounds. The kind of mundane morning symphony that still sometimes made her chest tight with disbelief. Lena pulled on a robe and padded downstairs, pausing in the doorway to watch father and son collaborate on what appeared to be pancakes. Ethan stood on a step stool at the counter, his small hands carefully pouring batter into a bowl, while Victor supervised with the kind of intense focus he once reserved for business negotiations. "Not too much, buddy. Remember what happened last time when we overfilled the bowl?" "It went everywhere," Ethan giggled, clearly delighted by the memory of batter-covered chaos. "But we cleaned it up, right, Daddy?" The word still made Lena's heart skip. They told Ethan the truth 6 weeks ago, sitting him down in the treehouse with the kind of careful preparation usually reserved for major announcements. Lena had been terrified of how he'd react, worried about confusion or anger or rejection. But Ethan had simply looked at Victor with those dark eyes so like his father's and said, "I knew it. You have the same nose as me." Children, Lena had learned, were far more resilient than adults gave them credit for. "Good morning," she said from the doorway, and both males turned toward her with matching smiles that made her wonder how she'd ever convinced herself they weren't related. "Mama, we're making pancakes. Daddy said I could flip them if I'm very careful." Ethan's excitement was infectious. "I'm sure that'll go perfectly well with no disasters whatsoever," Lena said dryly, moving into the kitchen to pour herself coffee from the pot Victor had already brewed. He knew how she took it now. 2 sugars, splash of cream, and the simple fact of that knowledge felt intimate in a way that still surprised her. Victor caught her eye over Ethan's head, his expression warm. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Lena admitted, and it was true. The nightmares that had plagued her for so long, dreams of being found, of Ethan being taken, of violence erupting into their careful peace, had gradually faded. She still had bad nights occasionally, but Victor had learned to recognize the signs, to hold her through the worst of it without demanding explanations she wasn't ready to give. They'd fallen into rhythms, the 3 of them. Mornings in the kitchen, Ethan's boundless energy filling spaces that had once felt too large and empty. Afternoons when Victor worked from home while Lena pursued the online degree she'd abandoned years ago, Ethan playing nearby or attending the small private preschool Victor had carefully vetted. Evenings together, dinner as a family, bedtime stories that both parents now shared. It wasn't perfect. They still fought, still navigated the complicated terrain of two strong-willed people learning to compromise. But they were trying, actively and intentionally, and that made all the difference. "Can we go to the park after breakfast?" Ethan asked, his attention already moving to the next activity. "I want to show Daddy how high I can swing now." "We'll see," Lena said automatically, the parental dodge that meant probably yes, but with conditions. She looked at Victor. "Do you have meetings today?" "Nothing that can't be rescheduled," Victor said, and the ease with which he said it still amazed her. The Victor she'd known 5 years ago would never have canceled business for a park visit. But this Victor, the one who'd slowly been revealing himself over the past months, had different priorities. They ate breakfast together, pancakes that were only slightly burnt because Ethan had insisted on flipping them himself, and Lena watched her son chatter at his father about dinosaurs and superheroes and the elaborate imaginary world he'd constructed in the treehouse. Victor listened with the kind of attention that suggested Ethan's words were the most important thing in the universe, asking questions and offering observations that kept the conversation flowing. This was what she'd been afraid to want, this simple domesticity, this feeling of rightness, this sense that maybe, just maybe, they could build something lasting. After breakfast, while Victor took Ethan upstairs to get dressed for the park, Lena's phone rang. Unknown number. Her old instincts flared, that familiar spike of adrenaline that accompanied unexpected contact, but she answered anyway. "Ms. Hart, this is Jennifer Chen from Westside Elementary. I'm calling about Ethan's enrollment for next fall." Lena's stomach dropped. She'd completely forgotten about the kindergarten applications she'd submitted months ago, back when she was still living in the apartment, still convinced this situation with Victor was temporary. "I'm so sorry," Lena interrupted. "There's been a change in circumstances. Ethan won't be attending Westside. I need to withdraw his application." A pause on the other end. "Oh, may I ask if he'll be enrolling elsewhere in the district?" "I'm not sure yet," Lena admitted, because she and Victor hadn't actually discussed this, hadn't talked about what Ethan's education would look like, whether he'd attend public school or private, whether they'd even stay in this neighborhood or move somewhere else entirely. They'd been so focused on building their relationship day by day that they hadn't planned for the future. She ended the call and sat staring at her phone, the weight of unasked questions pressing down on her. What were they doing? Where was this going? She'd been living in Victor's house for 3 months, sharing his life, letting Ethan get attached, but they hadn't actually defined what this was or where it was headed. "Everything okay?" Victor appeared in the doorway, Ethan already racing past him toward the front door with his shoes in hand. "We need to talk," Lena said, and watched Victor's expression shift to something cautious. "Not a bad talk, just we need to make some decisions about the future, about what this is." Victor moved closer, his focus narrowing to her with that intensity that still made her breath catch. "What do you want it to be?" "I don't know," Lena said honestly. "I just know we can't keep existing in this limbo. Ethan has kindergarten enrollment coming up. I need to figure out what to do about work beyond the part-time remote stuff I've been doing. We need to define this. What we are, what we're building." "Okay," Victor said simply. "Let's talk tonight, after Ethan's asleep. Really talk about everything. Make actual plans instead of just taking it day by day." The agreement should have relieved her, but instead Lena felt anxiety coil tighter. Because talking meant confronting all the things they'd been avoiding, all the questions she'd been too afraid to ask. What if they couldn't agree? What if Victor's vision of their future was incompatible with hers? What if this fragile thing they'd built shattered under the weight of reality? The park visit was a welcome distraction. Ethan ran wild, burning off energy while Victor pushed him on the swings, and Lena watched from a bench, her mind churning through possibilities and fears. Other parents dotted the playground, and Lena found herself studying them, the married couples, the divorced co-parents awkwardly navigating shared custody, the single mothers doing it alone. Which category did she and Victor fit into? What were they becoming? "Mama, watch," Ethan called from the top of the slide, and Lena dutifully watched, applauding when he reached the bottom, her smile automatic even as her thoughts spiraled. Victor joined her on the bench, his shoulder brushing hers. You're overthinking. I'm considering variables, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Victor's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through in a gesture that had become natural over the past months. Lena, whatever we need to figure out, we'll figure it out together. That's what we agreed. I know, She stopped, watching Ethan climb the ladder again. I'm scared that what I want and what you want might not align. And then we're back to you making decisions and me feeling trapped. Or me pushing back and you feeling rejected. I don't want to go backwards. Then we won't, Victor said with the certainty of someone who'd spent a lifetime making things happen through sheer force of will. But then he paused, reconsidered. Or if we do go backwards, we'll recognize it and course correct. That's what this is, Lena. Not perfection. Just constant adjustment and communication and choosing each other every day. Lena leaned into him, letting his solid presence ground her. When did you get so wise about relationships? I've been reading books, Victor admitted, and Lena pulled back to stare at him. Books? What kind of books? Parenting books. Relationship books. Anything I could find about being a better partner and father. He looked almost embarrassed. I know I don't have the instincts for this, so I'm learning, actively. The image of Victor Romano, feared businessman and former crime boss, reading relationship self-help books, was so incongruous it made Lena laugh, surprised and genuine. That's actually incredibly sweet. Don't tell anyone, Victor said, but he was smiling. I have a reputation to maintain. They stayed at the park until early afternoon, then stopped for ice cream on the way home. Ethan's face covered in chocolate by the time they pulled into the driveway. The normalcy of it all, the sticky hands and cheerful chaos and easy affection, felt like a miracle Lena was still afraid to trust completely. That evening, after Ethan was bathed and storied and tucked into bed, Lena found Victor in his office. He'd cleared space on the sofa, had poured 2 glasses of wine, and had what looked like a notebook open on the coffee table. You're really prepared for this conversation, Lena observed, settling onto the sofa beside him. I've been thinking about it for weeks, Victor admitted, waiting for you to be ready to have it, but I didn't want to push. Lena took a sip of wine, fortifying herself. Okay, so let's start with the practical stuff. Ethan needs to be enrolled somewhere for kindergarten. What are our options? Victor flipped open the notebook, revealing pages of handwritten notes and printed information about various schools. I've researched both public and private options within a 30-minute radius. The public school in this district has an excellent rating, but there's also Riverside Academy, private, smaller class sizes, strong academics but not pretentious, and Montessori programs if we want something more alternative. Lena stared at the notes, touched by the thoroughness of his research. You've really thought about this. He's my son. Of course I've thought about it. Victor met her eyes. But ultimately, it's your decision too. I have opinions, but I want to hear yours first. The fact that he'd led with her opinion instead of his own preferences felt significant. Lena studied the information he'd compiled, asking questions, weighing options. They discussed class sizes and teaching philosophies and proximity to home until a picture started to emerge. I think Riverside, Lena said finally. The smaller environment feels right for him, and the academics are strong without being overwhelming. But Victor, that tuition isn't a concern, Victor finished. If that's what's best for Ethan, then that's what we'll do. Money had been another adjustment. Lena had insisted on maintaining some financial independence, had taken remote work that let her contribute to expenses, even though Victor had made it clear he didn't need or expect it. They'd found a compromise. She paid for groceries and Ethan's clothes. He handled everything else. It wasn't equal, but it let Lena maintain some autonomy while accepting the reality of Victor's resources. Okay, Riverside it is. Lena made a note on her phone. What else? Victor took a breath and Lena recognized the tell. This was the hard part, the conversation he'd been building toward. I want to marry you, he said simply. I want us to be a family legally, not just practically. I want Ethan to have my name, and I want you to have it too, if you'll take it. Lena's heart stuttered. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building over the past weeks, but hearing it stated so baldly still made her breath catch. Victor, let me finish, he said gently. I know it's fast. I know we've only been doing this for 3 months. But Lena, I've loved you for 5 years. I've wanted this for 5 years. The only thing that's changed is that now I'm smart enough to do it right, to make it a partnership instead of a possession. I'm not asking you to answer tonight. I'm putting it on the table, so you know where I stand. Lena set down her wine glass with shaking hands. Marriage. Legal ties. Making this permanent in a way that terrified her even as part of her desperately wanted it. I need time, she said finally, to think about it, to make sure I'm choosing it for the right reasons, not because it's comfortable or because I'm afraid of being alone again. Take all the time you need, Victor said. Weeks, months, whatever. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We can figure out the rest as we go. But even as he said it, Lena knew her answer, had known it really, since that night in his office when they had stopped fighting the inevitable. She was just afraid to say it out loud, to make it real, to acknowledge that she was choosing this life with full awareness of what it meant. Ask me again, she said quietly. Properly. Not as a statement of intent, but as a real question. Victor's expression shifted, surprise giving way to hope, giving way to determination. He stood, pulled something from his desk drawer, and returned with a small velvet box that made Lena's heart hammer. I bought this a month ago, he admitted. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. Guess this is it. He knelt in front of her, the box open to reveal a ring that was perfect in its simplicity. A single diamond, elegant and understated, nothing ostentatious or showy. Exactly what Lena would have chosen for herself. Lena Hart, Victor said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You're the love of my life, the mother of my son, and the strongest person I know. You challenged me to be better, and you gave me a second chance I never deserved. I'm asking you to take a chance on us, on building a life together, on being partners in every sense of the word. Will you marry me? Lena looked at him, this man who'd terrified her and loved her and driven her to run halfway across the country. This man who'd found her again and refused to give up, who'd learned and grown and changed in ways she'd never thought possible. This man who read parenting books and built tree houses and held her through nightmares and made her son laugh with a joy she'd never been able to give him alone. Yes, she whispered and watched joy transform his face. Yes, I'll marry you. Victor slid the ring onto her finger, and Lena felt the weight of it settle like a promise. Then he was pulling her down to the floor with him, kissing her with a passion that still made her dizzy. And Lena kissed him back with everything she had, all the love and fear and hope and trust that had been building over these months. They broke apart breathless, foreheads pressed together, and Lena laughed shakily. This is insane! We're insane! 3 months ago, I was convinced you were going to ruin our lives. And now? Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone, the gesture achingly tender. Now I think maybe you might save them instead, Lena admitted. If I let you, if we do this together. Together, Victor agreed. Always together. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, a small ceremony in the garden with only close friends and family. Lena wore a simple cream dress. Ethan served as ring bearer with solemn importance, and Victor cried when she walked down the makeshift aisle on Mrs. Chen's arm. The older woman beaming with the joy of someone who'd been rooting for them from the beginning. They said vows they'd written themselves, promises of partnership and honesty, and choosing each other every day. Lena promised to trust him with her heart, to believe in his capacity for change, to build a life that honored both their strengths. Victor promised to always ask instead of assume, to value her autonomy as much as her safety, to be worthy of the second chance she'd given him. When the officiant pronounced them married, Ethan cheered louder than anyone, and Lena felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of coming home, of finally being exactly where she was meant to be. The months that followed were an adjustment. Lena officially changed her name to Romano, gave Ethan the same last name, started building a life that wasn't defined by running or hiding. She finished her degree, started working part-time at a nonprofit that helped domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives, found purpose in using her experiences to help others. Victor continued transitioning his business toward legitimate enterprises, a process that was slower and more complicated than Lena had imagined, but that he pursued with dogged determination. There were still moments when his past surfaced, when old contacts or old habits threatened to pull him back. But he talked to her about it now, let her help him navigate the difficult choices, treated her like a partner instead of someone to protect from reality. Ethan thrived, growing more confident and joyful with each passing month. He started kindergarten at Riverside Academy, made friends easily, came home every day with stories and artwork, and an enthusiasm for learning that made Lena's heart swell. He had Victor's intensity and her compassion, and watching the two of them together, building Lego cities or reading books or just talking about life, never got old. 1 year after their wedding, Lena discovered she was pregnant again. The news came with complicated emotions, joy and fear tangled together, memories of the last time she'd held a positive pregnancy test and made the choice to run. But this time, when she told Victor, he held her and wept and promised her that this time would be different, that she wouldn't have to face anything alone. The pregnancy was easier than Ethan's had been, partly because Lena wasn't carrying the weight of fear and secrecy, partly because she had support she'd lacked the first time. Victor attended every appointment, asked a million questions, read even more books about pregnancy and infant care. Ethan was excited about becoming a big brother, already planning all the things he'd teach the baby. Their daughter was born on a cool spring morning, arriving early just like her brother had. They named her Sophia, and when the nurse placed her in Lena's arms, when Victor looked at both his children with wonder and love and fierce protectiveness, Lena felt the last piece of her fear dissolve. This was her family, messy and complicated and built on second chances and hard-won trust, but hers, theirs. 2 years after that, Lena stood in the kitchen of their home, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, and watched her children play in the garden while Victor worked at the table beside her, his laptop open, but his attention clearly divided between spreadsheets and the scene outside. Ethan was 7 now, all gangly limbs and endless energy, teaching Sophia how to navigate the treehouse that had been expanded to accommodate 2 children instead of 1. Their daughter was fearless, climbing without hesitation, trusting her big brother completely. "They're going to give me a heart attack," Victor said, watching Sophia scale a ladder that seemed too tall for a 2-year-old. "She's fine. Ethan won't let anything happen to her." Lena moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and pressing a kiss to his temple. "You worry too much. I'm a father. Worrying is in the job description." But Victor was smiling, his hand coming up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. Lena's phone buzzed with a reminder. A meeting at the nonprofit in an hour, a case she was consulting on. Her work had expanded over the years, her expertise in survival and reinvention making her invaluable to women trying to escape dangerous situations. It was fulfilling in a way she'd never expected, giving purpose to the pain she'd endured. "I need to head out soon," she said reluctantly. "I'll handle dinner," Victor offered. "Maybe I'll actually follow a recipe this time instead of improvising." "You say that every time, and yet somehow we always end up with experimental pasta," Lena teased, but she was smiling. Victor's cooking had become a running joke in their household, enthusiastic but unpredictable. She kissed him properly before leaving, a kiss that still had the power to make her heart race even after years of marriage. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. Driving to her meeting, Lena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 5 years of running, convinced that safety meant solitude, that protecting Ethan meant keeping Victor out of their lives. And then that Saturday at the farmer's market, the moment her carefully constructed world had crumbled, forcing her to confront everything she'd been avoiding. She'd been so certain she knew what was best, so convinced that Victor's world would destroy them. And in some ways, she'd been right. His world was dangerous, complicated, full of threats that required constant vigilance. But what she'd learned was that running from danger didn't eliminate it. It just meant facing it alone. And being with Victor, building a partnership based on trust and communication and shared responsibility, was stronger than any protection she could have provided solo. Their life wasn't perfect. They still fought, still struggled with Victor's controlling tendencies and Lena's occasional need to bolt when things got intense. But they worked through it, talked through it, chose each other even when it was hard. And their children were growing up in a world where love was complicated but constant, where safety came from unity rather than isolation, where family meant showing up even when it was difficult. That evening, after her meeting, Lena returned home to chaos, dinner bubbling over on the stove, Ethan covered in what looked like tomato sauce, Sophia shrieking with laughter from her high chair, and Victor in the middle of it all looking simultaneously overwhelmed and delighted. "I may have underestimated the complexity of lasagna," he admitted when Lena appeared in the doorway. "You think?" But Lena was laughing, moving to help, falling into the familiar rhythm of family dinner. They salvaged the meal, got the children cleaned up and fed, managed bedtime routines that involved 2 stories, 3 glasses of water, and Ethan's insistence on explaining his entire day in exhaustive detail. Later, when both children were finally asleep and the kitchen was clean and the house was quiet, Victor found Lena on the back patio, looking up at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" He settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "Just thinking about how different everything is from how I imagined it would be," Lena said. 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be here, married to you, with 2 kids, and a life I actually love instead of just endure, I would have thought they were crazy." "Regrets?" Victor asked, and there was vulnerability in the question despite years of reassurance. "Not even one," Lena said honestly. "I mean, I wish I hadn't wasted 5 years running. I wish Ethan had known you from the beginning. But the woman I was back then wasn't ready for this. I had to become who I am now to make this work." "We both did," Victor agreed. "I had to learn that love isn't about control, that protection doesn't mean possession, that the strongest thing I could do was give you the freedom to choose me instead of forcing you to stay." Lena turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "I choose you. Every day I choose you. And I'll keep choosing you for the rest of our lives." Victor kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise. And Lena kissed him back, tasting hope and home and everything they'd built from the ashes of what they'd almost destroyed. Their empire wasn't built on fear or power or control. It was built on trust, on partnership, on 2 people who'd been willing to fight for each other even when the odds seemed impossible. It was built on honesty and compromise and the daily choice to show up, to communicate, to try. It was built on love, messy and complicated and real. And it was everything Lena had never known she wanted, everything she'd been too afraid to hope for, everything that made the risk worthwhile. She'd stopped running, she'd stopped hiding, she'd stopped believing that safety meant solitude. And in its place, she'd found something better. She'd found a partner who valued her strength instead of fearing it. She'd found children who thrived in the security of being loved by both parents. She'd found purpose in helping others escape the fear she'd finally conquered. She'd found home, not in a place, but in people, in the family she'd been terrified to build and now couldn't imagine living without. The past had finally stopped chasing them, and the future stretched out ahead, full of possibility and promise, and the kind of happiness that only comes from choosing love over fear, trust over control, togetherness over safety and isolation. Lena Hart Romano had spent 5 years running from Victor Romano, but in the end, running toward him had been the bravest thing she'd ever done. And every day since, she'd proven that bravery wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and choosing love anyway. Their story wasn't about escape or hiding or protection through distance. It was about arrival, about finding the courage to stand still, to trust, to build something lasting in a world that often felt too dangerous to risk your heart. It was about power and devotion finally aligning, creating something stronger than either could have built alone. It was about family, chosen, fought for, and cherished. And it was about love that didn't disappear just because it was dangerous, but instead became something worth fighting for precisely because of what it cost. They'd paid the price. They'd done the work. They'd earned this peace. And as Lena sat under the stars with Victor's arms around her and their children sleeping safely inside, she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of fear, every mile of running, every tear of doubt had been worth it, because it had led her here, home.